I was standing in a county command room when I realized the woman who'd spent weeks trying to erase my property lines was about to lose everything. Her hands were shaking, her red blazer suddenly too bright under the fluorescent lights, and behind her on a wall-sized screen was the fake shoreline map she never thought anyone would really dissect. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This was the exact second a lie finally ran out of room to hide. I didn't wake up that morning planning to fight an HOA. I woke up thinking about water pressure and an old intake valve my grandfather installed back in 1901. That valve had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. My dad used to bring me down there as a kid, explaining how the lake fed the fields, how the land worked if you respected it, how you didn't rush things that were older than you. That morning was no different. Just me, a wrench, the quiet hum of wind moving across the water, and the comfort that comes from doing honest work on land that's been in your family longer than most towns have existed. I was crouched near the shoreline, tightening a joint by hand, when I heard engines. Not tractors, not ranch trucks, diesels, slow, deliberate. The kind of sound that doesn't belong on a private gravel road unless something's wrong. I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and saw 2 county patrol trucks idling just outside my gate. Lights flashing, sirens off. That detail stuck with me. Around here, deputies know exactly where private property begins and ends. If they were waiting instead of rolling in, it meant they already knew something was off. My kids were frozen on the porch. My daughter's hand clenched the railing like she wasn't sure whether to run or stay put. I walked toward the gate boots, crunching, heart steady but tight. One of the deputies stepped forward, hat low expression, uncomfortable. He said they'd received a complaint. Heavy equipment. Hazardous water activity. I actually laughed, a short breath that came out sharper than I meant it to. I told him the valve had been there for over a century, that I was using hand tools, that he'd probably seen it himself a dozen times over the years. That's when I noticed her. Standing just behind the patrol truck, arms crossed like she owned the valley, was Bethany Crowell, president of the Willow Ridge HOA. Red blazer, sunglasses, that thin, satisfied smile people wear when they think they've already won. She didn't even pretend to stay back. She pointed toward the lake like she was presenting evidence in court. Said I was conducting industrial activity. Said the community had concerns, said insurance required her to report it. Community. That word hit wrong. This wasn't her community. This was my land, my water, my shoreline. I told her that. She tilted her head like she felt sorry for me. Said the pump noise carried. Said residents were worried. There was no pump running. The deputy confirmed it. He marked the complaint unfounded, told me to have a good morning. But Bethany didn't leave right away. She stood there scanning the lake, measuring it with her eyes like she was already planning something else. That should have been the end of it. One annoying HOA president overstepping, getting corrected by reality, moving on. But it wasn't. The next morning I found a violation notice taped to my gate like a warning label. Unsafe shoreline activity. Level 2 hazard. No photos, no signature, just HOA letterhead and a threat. By noon, another one showed up. Unauthorized pump noise. Then another. Dangerous water flow. 7 violations in a short stretch of time, each one citing a different HOA bylaw, each one more absurd than the last. At first, I tried to brush it off. Paper noise. Bureaucratic nonsense. The kind of thing that feels threatening until you remember the facts. My water rights predated the HOA by nearly a century. They had no jurisdiction over my shoreline, my lake, or my intake system. I knew that. They knew that. Still, the notices kept coming. And something about the pattern bothered me. It wasn't random. It was methodical. Like someone firing shots not to hit, but to see where the armor was weakest. My kids noticed before I wanted them to. They always do. They asked if we were in trouble, if we were going to have to leave. I told them no. I told them nobody could make us go anywhere. I believed it when I said it, but later that night, standing alone by the water, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. Not about my rights, but about how far someone might be willing to push when they stop caring about truth. Around day 4, I caught Bethany standing on the ridge above my property phone, held up panning across my fence line like she was documenting a construction site. She wasn't hiding it. That was the point. She wanted me to see her watching. By day 6, I heard whispers in town that my lake was unsafe, that the county was looking into it, that I might be forced to shut things down. I didn't confront anyone. Confrontation without evidence is how traps get sprung. Instead, I spread every violation notice across my kitchen table. Old pine wood, scarred by generations of use, now covered in threats printed on clean white paper. I started making columns. Claim, HOA authority, land rights. By midnight, every single accusation collapsed under the same truth. The HOA had zero authority over any of it. And that's when my fear shifted into something colder and more focused. If this wasn't ignorance, it was intent. The next morning I walked the fence line to my nearest neighbor, a quiet man who'd been there long enough to know how things really worked. When I asked him straight out if the HOA had been asking questions, he didn't dodge. He said they were talking about property values, about how my lake affected the subdivision, about how the shoreline might need regulation for safety. One word stuck with me: expandable. He said Bethany used that word, expandable territory. That was the moment everything snapped into place. This wasn't about noise, or safety, or compliance. This was about control, about pushing a boundary slowly enough that people wouldn't notice until it was too late. That night my father came out to the porch wrapped in a blanket, eyes drifting between clarity and fog the way they sometimes do now. He looked at the ridge, then at the lake, then at me. He said people like that always start small. They poke, then they push, then they claim. Coming from a man who'd surveyed land for 40 years, even in his fading state, that warning carried weight. He told me to document everything, said paperwork was the weapon they'd use. And for the first time since this started, I felt something like resolve settle in my chest. I installed cameras, not because I expected trespassers, but because cameras don't lie. I pulled out deed boxes, survey maps, dam permits, handwritten notes from my grandfather. I checked elevations myself. Everything matched the original records within inches. There was no ambiguity, no wiggle room, and yet Bethany kept circling, kept filming, kept escalating. 2 days later, she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She walked straight through my gate with a man in a reflective vest, and a clipboard announced she was conducting a safety inspection and ordered him to take photos. I stepped in front of them and told them to leave. She didn't blink. She said she had authority. When the inspector hesitated, she dialed her phone and loudly reported that I was becoming aggressive. Within minutes, a patrol truck rolled in again. This time, the deputy's patience was thinner. He asked what was happening. The inspector admitted he hadn't seen anything hazardous. Bethany insisted she felt threatened. I watched the deputy write something down, not a charge, just a report. And I knew exactly what that was. A paper trail. Something she could point to later and say, "See, even law enforcement had concerns." After they left, she lingered, staring at my land like she was already planning how to carve it up. She said property lines were flexible when safety was involved. I stood there long after she walked away, listening to the lake lap against the shore, feeling a mix of anger and something heavier: weariness. There was a moment that night, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by maps and notices, when I wondered if this was worth it. If fighting someone with time money and a board behind her was just asking for more pain. I asked myself if maybe I should back off, let her have whatever symbolic win she wanted just to protect my family from the stress. That thought scared me more than Bethany ever had, because it meant she was already winning. The reason I didn't give up came down to one thing: evidence. Not feelings, not pride. Evidence. And when I finally saw it, it was undeniable. Bethany had filed a preliminary shoreline map with the county. A map that shifted the historical high water mark hundreds of feet into my property. A map that, if accepted, would give the HOA a foothold they could argue over for years. I called a land rights attorney I trusted. She took one look at the documents and went quiet. Then she said the words that changed everything. "This isn't just wrong, it's falsified. That map wasn't updated data, it was altered, lifted from an old survey and manipulated to fit a narrative. Submitting it wasn't a mistake, it was a crime." From that point on, I stopped reacting and started building a case. We lined up the original deeds, the authentic surveys, the elevation data, the camera footage of her directing inspectors to ignore property lines. The more we assembled, the clearer the pattern became. Bethany hadn't stumbled into overreach. She'd planned it. She'd filed complaints before submitting the map. She'd created noise to justify paperwork she'd already prepared. The confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in a county command office. A plain room with steel tables, wall-mounted monitors, and recording equipment designed to capture every word. When Bethany walked in, she brought 2 board members like props, but they were sent away. This wasn't an HOA meeting. This was a review with legal standing. She started confident, talking about community safety, about negligence, about her responsibility as president. I let her talk. Then I turned on the screen. Side by side, the real survey and her fake one. The contour lines didn't match. The elevations were wrong. A faint original line was still visible beneath the altered data, something my father noticed immediately when he traced it with a shaking finger the night before. Her face drained of color. She tried to deflect, blamed a consultant, claimed updates. The county clerk shut that down. Updates come from field surveys, not digital manipulation. The sheriff laid out the timeline of her complaints filed before any evidence existed. Then we played the audio of her ordering an inspector to proceed despite lacking jurisdiction. The room went silent in a way that felt heavy final. When the county official spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. He said her claims were invalid. The map was fraudulent. The HOA had no authority over my land, and her actions were being referred for further investigation. Bethany didn't explode. She didn't scream. She just collapsed, inward, shoulders sagging, the confidence draining out of her like water through a cracked dam. When she asked what happened next, I told her simply that her claims collapsed. That was it. No insults, no victory speech, just truth finally spoken in a room that mattered. She left without looking at me. The fallout came fast after that. The HOA tried one last desperate move, issuing a shutdown order they had no authority to enforce. The county shut that down within hours. The state got involved. Her falsified map triggered reviews she couldn't control. Within weeks, she was removed as HOA president. The board unraveled. Every fine was refunded, every claim nullified. The lake went quiet again. Not because it ever needed protection, but because the noise finally stopped. I stood by the shoreline one evening, my kids skipping stones, my father resting his hand on an old fence post he'd measured countless times. He looked at the water and said the land stood honest again. And for the first time in months, I believed him. The lesson was simple. Truth doesn't need volume, it just needs room to stand.